Hi there, this is Wafa AlObaidat. You are listening to the Women Power Podcast, a subsidiary platform to the Women Power Summit, the largest event in MENA, with the aim of empowering women and helping them achieve their absolute highest potential. Each week on the Women Power Podcast, you will hear honest, vulnerable, authentic, real conversations from inspiring women. These women will share their experiences and stories into what it takes to build a successful business and career. The podcast will share insight and inspiration and hopefully inspire action and lead change. If you don't feel like you want to hear a traumatic story, perhaps this is not for you. I've been thinking about recording this podcast for quite some time. I've always felt that I haven't had the avenue or the space to fully articulate my experience with miscarriage. I feel that I've tried to bring this up in different interviews where I felt it was important for me to share my story. However, in interviews, you're constantly being interrupted with new questions, and I totally get that. And the host is trying to navigate the conversation. And also some hosts don't know how to process or deal with this topic, so it can get a little bit awkward. So I thought, I have this incredible platform, and I'm so grateful for the community we've built around embracing vulnerability and strong women and strong energy, that I just thought it would be befitting to marry the two and share my story on here. So I started working on the notes for this podcast. And usually when I start a podcast, especially a solo podcast episode, I do write down some notes so I can really be focused and not go off tangent. I've written 11 pages of notes. This story was really hard for me to write and process. I relived a lot of the many emotions that I want to forget about. I've had to stop writing a couple of times because I felt myself getting really emotional, and then I had to shift into something else to gain some emotional control back. After I got halfway through my note development, I really was wondering why I was even doing this to myself. It's really hard. And I think anybody who's had a similar experience would tell you that you don't want to process this information, and you also just don't want to relive it. It's really sad. It's a very sad experience for anybody who's gone through this and any family member who knows someone or a friend that's gone through this. But my intention, and I've had to write this down at the very beginning of my notes so I can stay focused on why this is important for me to do, not as a sort of release for me or a healing experience. I do feel that I've done a lot of work in that area. But my intention is, I don't want this to be a sob story. This is not an exaggerated story. It's not designed for attention or for me to sound like a victim, because far from it, I feel really empowered by this experience. It's not designed to highlight the incompetency of any hospital or doctor that I've experienced. The pure intention of this episode is to make anyone who's suffered a loss, who's either lost a baby or has had a miscarriage, feel like they're less alone and that it's going to be okay. If I could walk away from one thing, it's that the collective community was there for me when I needed them the most, and I feel it's my duty to be there for them and to continue to pass that on. So what can I say about this experience? I've always known I wanted to be a mom. Some women are not maternal, and I know that, and I have friends who are extremely not maternal. And when I gave birth, they said, it's perfectly fine for us not to see the baby. We just want to see you. And I have friends who are very uncomfortable around babies. And I know a lot of women who have a huge fear of having children for different reasons. And I'm not here to talk about them, but I want to focus on my experience. And I feel like my mom has made me love the idea of being a mom. And I always felt like it's an honor and a privilege to be that person and for that to be part of my identity. I do believe we're the biggest loves of my mother's life. She's lived every day to show us, or to show me, that she loved me, she was there for me, she believed in me, and she's put me first. So when you see it and you feel that love, it can only mean that she created in me this seed for also wanting to love children. Ever since I was in my early 20s, I've always wanted to have a family. And in my vision for myself, I wanted to have, I don't want to say a complete life, but it was very important to me to have not just the career and to be career driven, which I believe I am, but also to have the relationship and the family. And that was a really intentional goal, to find a way to make all of that work. It was really essential for me to experience these things, to get them, to build them and integrate them into my life and to learn from them. So I've always had the intention of being a mom. I used to say, like, I can't wait to be a mom. I used to say that in my early 20s. I would always be like, I can't wait to be a mother. But the first time I was pregnant, I was not ready. I remember crying about it as well. I just kept thinking, no, I'm not ready. So to put some things in perspective, I had just gotten married. I had a destination wedding. I was exhausted. I had finished Ironman in December. I opened a new concept store. I was married in March. And from the duration, and right before that, so 9 months before December, I have been building up and training for this crazy, insane race that I signed up for. After the race was over, I could finally focus on my wedding. And more than the wedding, just really anchoring my relationship and taking it to the next level, which includes moving out. For anybody who doesn't live in this part of the world, most women, and I'm careful not to generalize, but most women do live with their parents until they get married. So this is quite a huge moment for us to move out and be independent and live with a partner. So I had gotten pregnant and I haven't even been on my honeymoon. We were meant to come to Bahrain and settle into our new home and then go on our honeymoon. I had just barely moved in. I remember our house just not having enough furniture yet. We were still buying furniture. And when I found out I was pregnant, I just kept thinking, I don't want this. I am not ready. And for the next 4 months, I would continue to repeat that. We've all heard the saying that the hardest year is the first year. New roommate, new habits. Dating is one thing and you get to see your partner in these allocated slots where you're dressed up and you're prepared. Marriage is a whole other animal. I discovered that I love seafood and my husband hates seafood. And I knew this before, but when you live with someone who hates seafood and you love seafood, you're at a constant battle over, don't order it. And I'm like, I want to have it and I'm craving it. So just to give you like a small snapshot of what it's like to move in with someone, if you haven't had a roommate, you do end up being really petty and just kind of going at each other. And I know it takes a year to settle, and it truly did take a year for us to settle in, but I wanted to travel, and this was not in my plans. And for somebody who's all about setting goals and intentions, I really wanted to live and adapt to living with my partner before I became a mother. I'll give you some more context on my life at that moment as well. For the last 10 years, 12 years, I've been working 10 to 12 hours a day. Even when I travel or take time off, I'm connected. I am connected to my clients. I'm connected to my team. I'm available. I'm accessible. And I was running at 100 miles an hour. I would be eating in the car, or when I could, I'd sometimes nap in the car park at Fakhro Tower, which is where our office was, because I was exhausted. So in between meetings, I would literally nap in my car. I'd be putting my makeup on or reapplying my makeup as I was driving. And this worked for me. I was doing a lot of different things. I was building a company. And just the thought of going to visit an OB-GYN, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a pregnancy doctor or it's a baby doctor. I was scheduled for a 10-minute appointment the first time around. I picked the hospital that I wanted to deliver in because that was the hospital that I was born in. I felt really connected to that specific hospital. It was my hospital of choice. And I was scheduled for a 10-minute appointment. I treated that appointment like I would my client. I was almost pitching myself instead of really being vulnerable and talking about how I was feeling with the doctor. I didn't feel I had much support. I don't know if I asked for any support. I was alone a lot in this period. But even scheduling that 10-minute appointment with the doctor, and the hospital was about 10 minutes away from where I lived, I still felt like that was a nuisance. It was out of the way. It was disrupting my day. I would be going to these appointments with my phone, looking at my phone. I would rush through everything. I didn't ask any questions. I did face a lot of judgment from family members that I didn't slow down and rest, but how could I? I had a company to run. I was operating on fast for more than 10 years. My life was my career. I also felt like people depended on me, clients, my team, and I just felt so responsible, and I really had to be in control of everything. I would go to this appointment and I would rush through this appointment. That was my first mistake. The doctor would say, maintain your normal life. Don't change anything about what you're doing. And I was like, sure, you got it. I won't change and I won't sacrifice and I won't compromise. And you get that a lot as well from different people who tell you like, just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you have to overeat or, just maintain that normalcy. And that's a key message that gets drilled into you, not just from the doctors, but everybody around you. Now, at the time, I was an amateur triathlete. I was swimming 3 times a week. I would do 1 to 2 kilometers. And that's not a lot, but it is a lot if you're pregnant. And since everybody was like, maintain, like the message to me was maintain your normal life, I did that. What I didn't know was my normal was not normal. And I learned that the hard way. So I maintained all of it. And then 1 month in, the morning sickness started to creep up on me. And once again, everybody said, that's normal. Everyone throws up. You throw up from morning to night. That's normal. And I went to the doctor and I was like, I'm throwing up. And she's like, oh, that's normal. And in my 10-minute appointment with the doctor, I asked her if this was okay. And she said, yeah, it's completely fine. I'm not blaming anybody. I was not fussed personally. I thought that everybody got pregnant. Everybody had a baby. I don't know anybody who struggled. No one talked about it, at least around me. I was also at the time where a lot of my friends were getting pregnant and they were having healthy, beautiful children. And I thought that everybody would have beautiful, healthy children. Everybody was having babies around me, right, left and center. And they were having just not great pregnancies, not that I would see maybe or understand. And you would hear some complaining and some jokes. But obviously, like, I didn't physically see anybody not having healthy babies at the end. You really don't hear the stories of women trying or women who miscarry. It never occurred to me for 1 second, that anything can go wrong. And then I started throwing up all day, every day. It would start in the morning. It would end in the evening. I would become yellow. I lost a lot of weight. And all this time I kept thinking, is this normal? This is normal, right? Everybody says it's normal. I have to power through. So instead of slowing down, I pushed harder. I was tougher on myself to swim. I pushed myself to go to work even when I was exhausted and tired. I went to meetings. I would do the work. I would stay up all night. I remember people telling me not to post about my workouts because of the evil eye. That's really big in this part of the world. But most runners or triathletes would tell you, like, taking a pic of your watch, documenting your workouts is like a badge of honor. Here I was maintaining my normal life, taking pictures of my watch that had my kilometers clocked in. I started getting really heavy discharge. And once again, everybody said this was normal. I went to the doctor and I was like, I'm getting discharge. And she said, it's normal. I don't think I did enough flagging. And I'm not being very hard on myself either. I just didn't know any better. I, again, didn't know anybody who had struggled with pregnancy. I didn't know what to look for in terms of the signs. What I wasn't doing was eating well. I wasn't drinking any water. I was throwing up all the water I was drinking. I was obsessed and I craved sugar all the time. And I think it was probably because I was really low on energy. I was having the maximum daily intake that I could of Coke and caffeine, sometimes both, because it would give me the energy spike I needed to function. What I didn't know at the time was my body was so dehydrated. I couldn't even look at water. Water made me ill, and I just couldn't understand why it made me feel so sick. Everybody would be like, drink water. I just couldn't swallow it. And then I would just have some sugar or caffeine, and then I would notice a shift in my mood. I'd feel a bit more energetic. After a while, I became really snappy and rude, especially to people that I loved. I was so horrible to anybody who was advising me to do anything. I just wanted everybody to get off my back. Again, what I didn't know was that my body was really struggling. I was tired, I was dehydrated, and I was still pushing on. I was attending client meetings in the August heat. I remember one meeting I had was in the middle of the city, or there was no parking spaces next to the building. I would park 10 minutes away from the building where I had a meeting and walk at noon. And if anyone lives in the GCC, our summers are ruthless. But again, I was just pushing on. I was like maintaining my normal life, and I felt like I could handle it. My body would overheat sometimes, and again, I was never aware of it overheating. I would just get really hot and think, oh, it's because I was pregnant. But now looking back, I was definitely dehydrated. I couldn't figure out how to get my body to cool down. And it was because I wasn't drinking any water. I would kind of sit under the air conditioning and just try to cool down, but my body from the inside would be on fire. This was during the first 3 months of my pregnancy, and I was really adamant, and I was really determined not to tell people I was pregnant. I didn't want it to affect my work. And I guess this was also a big mistake because I didn't want to explain to my clients and to my colleagues at work that I was pregnant. I would take meetings in places that are quite harmful, like going to a shisha place. And I remember this was such a tricky thing, and I don't know if I don't know why I'm sharing this story on here, but I just really want to be transparent about some of the challenges that I faced in this specific experience. So because I didn't want to tell potential clients, and my job is customer acquisition. So I was meeting all these people, but I didn't want to tell a complete stranger I was pregnant and we need to change the meeting time, because I'm all about being there for them, that I avoided saying, I can't go to this place because I'm pregnant. Instead, I went there, and that's maybe one of the most things I regret. I don't think I had the courage to say no. I still struggle with saying no. But when I'm pregnant, I should be able to draw some boundaries. I so desperately didn't want my pregnancy to affect my work. I didn't want to make my pregnancy an issue. I didn't want to be one of those women who said, I'm pregnant, I can't do this or that. And I just kept remembering the doctor's words, carry on as normal. Looking back, I wasn't normal. I was being sloppy. 4 months into my pregnancy, I pulled a crazy work day, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I attended a work event on behalf of one of my account managers because at the time she was on leave, and we always had each other's back. So when I would go on leave, she'd step in to support me. I wanted to ask someone else to cover for me, but I just couldn't connect or find someone to back me up. It was really late anyways to make that decision. So I said, I'll just power through. This is now in August. It's 10 p.m. at night. My body is in super heat. I am in the middle of nowhere attending a work event. And I came home exhausted. I got into bed, and all of a sudden my body started to shake and shiver. I was all alone at home, and I couldn't even get to a Panadol to relieve the pain and the stress. I got driven to my parents' home, and for the first time ever, I wanted to be close to my mom. This was the worst day of my life. At about 4 a.m., I started getting pains in my abdomen. They were really crazy pains. And here's the crazy part. All my life, my mom has been explaining to me how contractions work. She always describes it as this pulsing pain that starts from the lower part of your back that moves around your stomach and hits you at the bottom part of your stomach. And she always does this explanation with her hands. It goes around it starts from the back and hits you at the front, and it just goes in circles. And around 4:35 a.m., I felt like I was getting contractions. And I just remember this story, and it aligned perfectly with what I was feeling. I was getting consistent pain starting from the lower part of my back all the way around my stomach. There were these pulses. So I downloaded a contraction app and I started keeping track. Every 2 minutes, consistently almost, I was getting pain for 30 seconds. An hour and a half later, the time shortened, the gap shortened between contractions, and the contraction time increased. I woke up my mom really early in the morning. I packed a small bag, and I remember telling her, I'm checking myself into the hospital. Something is wrong and I'm not leaving until someone figures it out. I went to the hospital, so the first thing that happened is someone checked on the baby's heartbeats, and they said it's fine and it's there. But I'm still getting this pulsing pain. It's getting worse. 2 hours later, I'm checked into a private room, and the whole time the nurses and the doctor explain, as long as you're not bleeding, you're fine. As long as you're not bleeding, you're fine. And all of a sudden I went to the bathroom and I started to bleed. The minute I saw the bleeding, my heart fell. And I had to sit with myself for a minute and have a chat. I just literally was like, okay, Wafa, this is not good. You're getting a miscarriage. It's okay. You'll be fine. It's really crazy to think about that moment because I just knew. And I think the shivering, the shaking, the contractions, the app, and then the bleeding part, it's fine as long as you're not bleeding. And then when I bled, I was like, this is really bad. And the only way I could address this is by creating space between me and the situation and just asking myself to be really strong. I really took a minute to realize what was happening, and I chose to be strong. I chose how I would react, and I guess I was bracing myself for what was going to happen. I had no idea that taking that 1 minute to myself, just to talk to myself in my head, would help me, but also help the others around me deal with what was about to happen. I think when a woman gets a miscarriage, or at least when I got a miscarriage, it's hard at the moment to process the loss for myself. And I think what I recall in that experience is that, I'm losing something, but everyone around me is losing something as well. That was something I didn't plan on taking on as an emotional burden. My dad was losing his opportunity to be a grandfather, my mom a grandmother, my husband a father. My brothers were losing their first nephew or niece. And I think a big part of dealing with miscarriage is dealing with the family. And everybody grieves in different ways and processes this information in different ways. So you don't only have to deal with yourself, you have to deal with so many different individuals and how they feel about it. What really upset me the most, and I have to say this, is that the nurses and the doctor just kept saying everything was fine. It's fine. No one would admit to me that this was a red flag. No one prepared me. No one held my hand to say, listen, this is going to get worse and this is what's happening to you. My gut knew what was happening, but no one admitted it. This caused confusion. And I just wish someone held my hand to say, listen, this is what you're going through and you're going to be okay. Not having that just kept me in the dark. So I knew what was happening, but I just wish I had validation or affirmation from a certified person that would have probably helped me deal with things and help my family deal with things better. So after I started bleeding and shortly after that, my contractions started taking a toll on me. When the nurse and the doctor refused to measure my contractions and they kept saying, you shouldn't be having contractions, you're 4 months. I asked my husband to open the app and we started measuring things ourselves. At this point, I was contracting for 1 whole minute and then it went away for a minute and then it came back for a minute. So I know now that my contraction time has increased. And I kept telling the doctors, I'm getting contractions. And they were like, no, you're too early. At some point, my husband, who was a really heavy vapor at the time, kept going in and out of the hospital to calm down, to breathe. I just feel like he felt so helpless and maybe he couldn't process what was going on. I was screaming and yelling and nobody could do anything about it. At some point, while the doctor was talking to my parents and causing chaos, I grabbed my husband and I said, come sit next to me. I just want you to know I'm getting a miscarriage and it's going to be okay. And you have to be strong. He looked absolutely shocked. And looking back now, I got there before everyone mentally. And I was getting everybody to try to catch up with where I was at. I knew what was about to happen. Now, because the doctor kept saying over and over again, you're fine. And she looked a little bit shocked, to be honest. At this stage, she just didn't look like she knew how to handle the situation. And I snapped at her. I told her, listen, I'm getting a miscarriage. At that very same time, she was trying to figure out how to transfer me to a different hospital that had more resources. But I was really stubborn and wanted to stay where I was. I was surrounded by my family in a space that was comfortable to me. I was in a private room. And the thought of moving somewhere else, somewhere new, was really, really shocking to me. And I tried my best to defend my decision in between my screaming and my yelling during contractions. I do recall the doctor talking to each of my parents individually, giving them different reasons and versions of what she thought was happening to me. Everyone seemed confused and scared. My husband at that point has completely lost faith in the doctor and the hospital and just wanted to get me out of there. I still feel like we have discussions about this topic because I still say I should have stayed there and we should have just ignored her. She wanted me to leave and to be out of the way. I really felt like she didn't want, or the doctor, I really felt like the doctor didn't want me to be her problem. And that was my gut, I guess, kind of speaking to me. But my husband and my mom still say the hospital that you were in can't handle an emergency. What if you had to do a surgery? They don't have the tools. They clearly don't have the know-how and they didn't know what to do. So at some point I gave up and I just said, take me wherever. The decision was made to take me to a public hospital because, quote unquote, perhaps a different hospital will settle me down. I lost the fight. My husband made the decision as well. And I gave in. Now this is where the nightmare, the horror story really develops. At this stage, I'm in a lot of pain. I've been given a lot of medication, but I was still experiencing very terrible contractions. In between every contraction, I would pass out. I'd try to get some sleep. At this point, I haven't slept in quite some time. I haven't been comfortable in quite some time. I was physically exhausted. And at about noon, I was put in an ambulance and taken to a different hospital. I was really delirious. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and then passing out. I remember the ambulance feeling like an oven. Maybe my body felt like an oven, but I remember the ambulance just feeling really hot. And I was just like, where is the air conditioning? Like I wasn't getting cooler. There was no air on my face. Once I got to the hospital, I just stopped seeing any recognized faces. I could hear people screaming. So I was put in a space where other women were giving birth and maybe possibly going through contractions. I don't recall the quantity. I don't recall. It was a blur. I just was put in a space with curtains, but I could hear a lot of different sounds. And I recall the midwife who came with me saying, you're in good hands. And she left. All of a sudden, I'm alone. And I remember the nurses wanted to move my body from one bed, from the ambulance bed into like the hospital bed. And just them touching me, like trying to help me, made me howl with pain. It was, I felt like my bones were breaking. And they shifted me from one bed to another. And then I was all alone. No husband, no family. I kept asking where everybody was. And I was informed no one is allowed to come be by my side. And, I remember just screaming between contractions still. And something that really stayed with me is just the nurses' eyes being so glazed. I was such a number to them. I just don't recall feeling like someone was actually seeing me, like I was just another patient. There was one nurse who looked at my transfer paper and kind of told me off about why they have to pick up the slack from private hospitals versus public. And she took this opportunity to be, your transfer papers are not clear. And I really don't want to get into this, but, I was not able to get that transfer paper. But I do remember the nurse saying, the medication quantity is not clear. I can't give you anything. And this is such a mistake. And this is what we have to deal with. And perhaps her lecture was not in the right time, but it stayed with me that it's something that stayed with me. She was really angry. Maybe she wanted to help me, but couldn't. Maybe she was angry at the system. Maybe she was venting. I don't even remember what she looks like today or the sound of her voice. I just do remember very clearly getting a lecture on the fact that they have to clean up other people's mess. She also informed me I was 3 centimeters dilated when I arrived at the hospital. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I mean, today I understand that I was getting ready to give birth and nobody told me anything. And she informed me that I was 3 centimeters dilated when I arrived. That means that I was dilating on my way, or maybe maybe the hospital I was in knew that. But I didn't receive any information about that. So I understood that I don't know if I understood if I was giving birth. I just remember recalling that I was informed I was dilating. At 2 p.m. on the dot, there was a shift change. And all of a sudden, the nurse that was with me disappeared. My mom appeared by my side. And at some point, I told her, I need to go to the bathroom. I feel like there's something that's going to come out. And she ran out to look for someone to help me. And for a while, I was completely alone. All of a sudden, I felt this huge surge in my lower abdomen and I pushed the baby out. It was so surreal that after I was done pushing, I lay there just looking at the ceiling. I was alone. I had pushed something out of me. And just like magic, the pain was gone. Every ounce of this incredible bone-breaking feeling was gone. My eyes opened up. My energy levels came up. I could move my jaw. I was thinking clearly. I was crying tears of pain, and now I was very still. My breathing was turning to normal. My energy felt boosted. A nurse did come by, and I asked her to cut the umbilical cord. I wasn't as diplomatic as that, but I did ask for the baby to be removed. And this whole time I was staring at the ceiling. I think I was in shock. I know what was happening, but I think I was in shock still. Like, it was quite traumatizing. It's hard for me to process now as I write this down or as I share the story that how inhumane and emotionless and cold that sounds. I still don't know how to process those moments or what I was thinking. Perhaps I was thinking, what's the point? Perhaps I was defending myself and my emotions by saying, I don't want to deal with this and I don't want to see it. And maybe if I don't see it or, I disattach myself from the situation, I can overcome. Maybe I was protecting myself. Maybe this was a defense mechanism, a survival mechanism. Maybe I was angry at myself. Maybe I was angry at the hospital. Maybe I was angry at the situation. Maybe I was angry because I was alone. This whole time I was emotionless, staring at the wall. And the nurse, put this baby in, the same incubators that they put healthy babies in, which was very traumatizing. And it was too close to me. And I said, please move it away. And I guess she was wrapping it up. And I asked for the gender. And she said it was a boy. Now, I had really wanted a girl this whole time. And my heart really stung because I've been saying for 4 months that I don't want a boy and I want a girl. And I don't want a boy and I want a girl. And people say like, either one is a blessing, but I really wanted a girl. I still feel really bad today that I rejected this baby. And I really feel guilty that I made that happen because I wasn't accepting. I got exactly what I wanted. I didn't want the baby and I didn't want a boy. So here you go. You got what you wanted. I think that's something I still have to process every day because I really still feel like I was ungrateful. And it was not ever this little baby's fault. I didn't want it. I really wanted a girl because I guess I really value my relationship with my mom. I never had a sister. My mom didn't have a sister. We're so close. And I just love how she raised me. And I just really wanted a little girl because somehow my father made it into the ward. Despite all the nurses blocking him, he was really hysterical and he was telling me that we can't throw this baby away. And I guess the nurses had told him. And he's like, this baby has a soul and we had to bury him. I told him to do whatever he wanted. I was really separated. This was over. It didn't matter. My dad kept going on and on saying this baby had a soul and we have to bury it. And I said, that's fine. And I wasn't upset with him. I remember thinking I was really impressed he had come into the ward. Only my father would find a way to get into an all-female ward. And only my dad would be this stubborn. And only my dad would find a way to get his way. What I didn't know and what was happening in parallel is my dad, my husband, and my brothers would go and bury my baby and give it a name. So for hours I laid there listening to other women continue to go through their experiences of giving birth and having their contractions. I was still really still and shocked. I wasn't emotional. I just wanted to get out of there. I managed to get a room, a private room, and I slept. I don't recall if I was being put to sleep or I slept just out of pure exhaustion. I remember waking up alone and the first person I saw was the nurse. She was checking my vitals and she asked me, did you get a miscarriage? And I said, yes. She said, 4 months. And I nodded. And she said, me too, 4 months. I found out later that I had a serious infection spread all over my body and it was in my blood. And she said that what you're going through is actually very serious. Your whole body's infected. But I was still processing the fact that she said 4 months, me too. That was a profound healing moment for me. Because first of all, she looked at me like into my eyes and I felt seen. I felt recognized. I felt seen by somebody who's had a similar experience. And I didn't feel alone. Up until that point, I think I felt something was wrong with me. This doesn't happen to people. How could this have happened to me? Or you think like this would never happen to me. And it does happen to you. It's the weirdest kind of rush of thoughts that go in your head. But when she said that she also had an experience of miscarriage, I felt uplifted because I was like, oh, so I'm not alone. Like that was what was in my head. Like I'm not alone in this. It really meant the world for me that she took the time to share that information with me. I really thought something was wrong with me. And for a while, everybody around me, like my family, certain people thought something was wrong with me, and I had to tell them that this was common. Like even the nurse got it. The first thing I wanted to do was eat. I just felt like I've been hungry for months. I just wanted stomach fillers. I wanted bread, white bread, cheese. I just wanted whatever what was in the canteen. I slept for a while. And the strangest thing after a miscarriage is the people around you don't know how to be around you. I think some people look at the floor and they're really awkward. Some people try to make it better by saying comforting things. A lot of people feel sorry for you, and you can see that in their eyes. Like there's a lot of sympathy. And the first thing I noticed was everybody was looking at my face and trying to read my emotions. So here was another moment where I had to make a decision. And like that moment in the bathroom when I was like, okay, you're getting a miscarriage, and I was preparing myself, I also took a moment to reflect that, oh, whatever I'm feeling, they're going to feel. So if I'm having a meltdown, they're going to have a meltdown. And when I say they, I mean my family. I was surrounded by just close family members. So one of the hardest things I had to do was be strong. I made a decision in my head, and I said, if I had to look up to someone who was dealing with this exact experience, what would make me feel inspired? And I imagined a woman sitting strong, shoulders back, a smile on her face, knowing that things are going to be okay and reassuring everybody around her. Just not like, I didn't want to be a mess. I didn't want to be an emotional mess. And even if that's how I felt, I did not want to display it. So I took a moment to decide that for the next however long, in front of people, my strength, they'll mirror my strength. I can't stress how important this was to make the decision of how I'm going to position myself in all of this. I guess this is also a way of me taking some control back in a situation where I had no control. Everybody was sad, devastated. No one knew what to say. And the minute I not stood up, but sat high in my chair and smiled and said, you know, this was God's wishes and I'm going to go on to have healthy, beautiful children. And I would say this with a smile, not like a big smile, but I'd say it with a smile of strength. I immediately felt like everybody mirrored that back to me. So all of a sudden, everybody who had sympathy looked at me like I was a victim, started saying, you're right, alhamdulillah, دائما الواحد يقول الحمد لله. And they would smile as well, a smile of strength. It was much harder to control my emotions than it was to want to cry. I feel like it would have been very easy for me to cry, but what's the point? I'm just gonna make everyone feel worse, including myself. I parked all my emotions. I kept repeating over and over again that I was grateful and that I was sure I was going to have beautiful children in the future, and this happens to people and it's okay. And I kept saying if something was wrong with the baby, I'd rather, you know, they say if something was wrong with the baby, like better for the baby as well. Now, I was choking my tears, but I masked it really well. It's one of the most moments where I'm most proud of how I behaved. Now, it doesn't mean that I wasn't alone, I wouldn't cry, but I would really control that as well, because I just felt like if I started crying, I wouldn't stop. You know, I was checked in for my surgery just to make sure I was clean and everything was removed, if there was anything left. And my husband and I made such a great decision, which was to travel to the Chedi in Muscat for a couple of days just to get away from everything, from our home, from Bahrain, from our families, from dealing with people. I think choosing the Chedi was an accident. So Amman is known for its beautiful resorts and just simpler life. There isn't much. It's a really relaxed city and town. I feel like they really embody the arts of slow living. There are a lot of beautiful resorts overlooking the sea. A lot of the resorts are quite isolated. And, you know, it's the kind of city or country where, you know, you spend most of your time at the hotel. And we've heard a lot of good things about the Chedi. And I didn't realize how important it was for us to get away. There were a lot of things about the Chedi that I liked, and I want to kind of tap into some of these things, because I think if anybody needs time off and they have the privilege or they're lucky to be able to afford it and to travel, it's a 20-minute taxi ride from the airport. It just feels like from Bahrain, at least, it's, you could be in the hotel within 2 hours of traveling. And the Chedi feels more like a retreat. There was no music, it was music free. So there was a lot of silence, which I appreciated. They have a whole separate area for children. And I know that people don't think about this sometimes, but I think if you've just lost a baby, I think the last thing you'd want is to be in a space where you can see families and babies. It's hard. It just reminds you of what you've lost. So I was really happy to see that there was a separate area for children, and generally it was isolated from the rest of the adult sections or the adult pools. And so for the next 4 days, I read a lot. I brought a bunch of books with me, and I do tend to read, but I think I read more aggressively on this trip. I think I finished a book a day. I ate a lot. I had a lot of carbs, pizza, pasta, just a lot of food to fill my stomach. I, again, feel like I haven't eaten in months and eaten well and kept food in. I drank a lot of water. I slept a lot. And I recall a moment where I felt really torn because I was really in this beautiful place and I felt so guilty that, do I deserve to be here? Do I deserve to enjoy this? Do I deserve to treat myself to this trip? So I was really ping-ponging between feeling really guilty and just terrible to trying to find a time to relax and enjoy the sound of the sea or the food or the weather. I remember taking a shower on the first day in the hotel room and just having a complete meltdown in the shower. I think that's the first time I let myself go. I was alone. There was no one around me, and I just let it rip. I cried my heart out. After a while, when I do cry, I do tend to stop because I do feel like I'm always thinking, what's the point of crying this much? Because my face is going to be puffy, I'm going to get a headache, and my eyes are going to be puffy, and it's going to be so uncomfortable for me. So I do tend to stop myself from crying after a certain amount of time has passed. And it was crazy to think how me and my husband grieved in different ways. I disconnected from social media. I disconnected from WhatsApp. I had my phone shut ever since I was in the hospital. I didn't want to get any messages. I didn't want to talk to people. And, my husband was connected. He was working still. He had a couple of conference calls. He had to go back to the hotel room. And we dealt with it in 2 different ways. But I think we both agreed we needed just time and space without clutter and routine and noise to be able to process what we've just been through. I remember my best friend calling me constantly. I know she was trying to contact me because she called my husband and he would tell me, and I'd just be like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk to anybody right now. And I think what I was doing is I can't process other people's emotions without processing mine first. So again, I don't know if this is a defense mechanism or a survival mechanism, but I wanted to be alone and settle. God, I hate that word. That after the doctor used it, I hate settling down. I hate that sentence. But I wanted to find my ground again. I felt really unstable. I felt I had wobbly feet. I feel like I couldn't find my footing on the ground, and I needed time to gather myself, to plant my feet, and to feel rooted again. But before we went to Oman, she did come by and she dropped a Kindle over to our house as a gift for me. And I still talk about this with her again because I don't know why that Kindle meant so much to me, but it did. And I realized, they're not flowers, because I did get flowers in the hospital and I hated them and I wanted them out of the room. And I think the flowers felt to me personally like they were sympathy flowers, and they validated what had happened, and I just couldn't deal with it. So I didn't want flowers. I don't even know how to explain why that irritated me, but it did. But getting the Kindle made me feel a bit better. I do remember smiling when I received that package before I traveled, because I'm an avid reader. I wanted to buy a Kindle. I just didn't know how I felt about it. I still love reading paperback and hard copies, but I maybe felt I was getting something I loved, or maybe it was my best friend's way of saying, I'm here for you. I know you're going to like this. This won't replace anything, but I'm here and I'm thinking about you. And I know this is something you really wanted. I think everybody grieves in different ways, but it's crazy to think how much the miscarriage, and that experience creeps up on me every now and then at different stages in my life. My husband and I really took our time to try again. I think we needed at least 6 months to recover from that experience. Hats off to anybody who can do it quickly afterwards. It takes a lot of strength and power and strength of character, and I guess everybody is on their own journey. I mean, I guess there is no right or wrong actually, and everybody's on their path and should do what suits them. But usually when I go through a bad experience or a challenging experience, so this is in my personal life or at work, I tend to make a decision again that this is not going to be the year of miscarriage. It's going to be the year of the Women Power Summit or Ironman or something positive. And this is my strategy with coping with anything dark. I realized that I can make it about this breakup or about this closing of a business or whatever that challenge is, or I can change the narrative. And I always choose to change the narrative. So I signed up to Ironman again, and I threw myself into training because especially when I was pregnant, I was really upset that I couldn't train. And I just didn't want to wallow. I wanted to put all my energy in something positive. So 4 months later, I was doing this race. And I guess when I look back at this year, I just remember crossing the finish line and feeling like, wow, I would manage to come out from that and do something like this. So, I shift that negative energy into a positive one. Okay, and now here's the greatest part of the story. The highlight, the magic, the silver lining, the teaching, the healing, and it's all packed into what happened next. Once word got around to my close family and friends and colleagues that I got a miscarriage, I started getting messages and calls from women who wanted to share their story. I got at least 100 or so different people sharing their experiences with me. Some that stood out was a mom who had 2 miscarriages before she had a daughter my age. Another was one who got a stillborn at 9 months. There was one woman, God bless her. She was so vulnerable with me. She talked about having 7 miscarriages, and then she went on to have 3 beautiful kids. These women didn't share their stories with tears. They shared them with strength of character, reassurance, some with humor. They would shift my energy and take me out of a victim mode that I would be in sometimes into a positive one. I would always, the story would creep up, whether someone asked me, did you give birth yet? Or are you a mom? I would say, no, I've just had a miscarriage. And they'd be like, oh, me too. I've had 3, 2, 1, 5 miscarriages. The stories wouldn't stop coming. And I'm like, where were these stories? I had no idea this was so common. I had no idea this happened to women. And I understand why people don't share it. I get it, because it's such a dark part of your life. You want to kind of move on. And even doing this podcast, I've had to stop at least 6 times now to just let out a little cry, get out of my system and come back and do it again. It's just not easy to process this experience sometimes. But I recognize I was part of this community of resilient women who all made comebacks. They all overcame, and they went on to have beautiful families. A year later, I would have another miscarriage, but at 8 weeks, I started bleeding. I was at work, and I was put on bed rest for 2 weeks, but then the sac was already disintegrating. I didn't feel any pain. There was no traumatizing experience. And doctors have informed me that most likely it wasn't when you get a miscarriage. And again, this could be there's different schools of thought about this, but what I was informed is it probably just wasn't the right amount of, it wasn't formed properly. So it kind of just, doesn't work out or doesn't stick. A year after that, I would get pregnant again. And this time around, I did everything differently. So twice now, I tried to maintain my so called normal life. And this time around, I was just so grateful to be pregnant. I went with a different doctor, a great doctor, a wonderful doctor, who after seeing me in my 2nd month, noticed that I was looking really yellow and I was losing weight. So he asked me how much water are you drinking? And I'd say it was the repeated cycle again. I'd just be dehydrated. I couldn't drink water. So he started calculating my fluid intake and outtake. And then he went on to say, you're dehydrated. You're not retaining fluids. So he started putting me on IV, and he asked me to come back every 2 days, and I would continue taking IV for the first 4 to 5 months of my pregnancy. I found out later that I had something called hyperemesis, which happens to 1% of pregnant women. Now, there's a lot of information online, but how I understood it is it's extreme vomiting to the point of dehydration. Then you're more likely to pick up an infection, and it could harm you or the baby. So it made a lot of sense. I was throwing up morning to night. I was not retaining fluids. And I had no idea. But at the time, my body was fighting for itself. It was fighting for me. It was fighting for the baby. It was fighting. I had no liquids in my body. I was throwing up. I had no nutrients. And I understood my situation so much better. The IV really helped me. It kept my body hydrated. I overcame a huge fear of needles by going every other day or every day. But I knew now why I was tired, cranky, angry, mean to people. I mean, I don't know if anybody's had the experience of being dehydrated. You feel like you have no energy. And because of that, you're really, really agitated. You're frustrated. I was in pain, and I had no idea I was in pain. The doctor and me went and we deep dived into my lifestyle. He asked me to stop working. He asked me to de-stress. He asked me to stop everything and just rest. So I was put on bed rest for my entire pregnancy. I recall only a handful of times that I felt I had the energy to go out to run an errand or plan my baby shower or buy stuff for the baby. But overall, I was always at home, lying down, feet up and resting. The crazy thing about going 100 miles an hour to basically stopping and just foot on the brakes stopping is it happens in stages. So I was still trying to answer emails and calls. And then I'm really blessed as well, though, because my team at that stage were so supportive. They've seen me go through 2 very terrible experiences. And I was locked out of my email. My whole team kind of had a pact that, they were not going to involve me in anything good or bad, and they were going to deal with it themselves. For the first few months on bed rest, I really couldn't read, write, meditate. I had no energy. So even though I was taking on fluids and IV, I was still running on empty. I was still throwing up the food I ate. And all I could do is watch mind-numbing TV for 12 hours a day. Towards month 5 or 6, I was able to read again. I had the energy to focus. I discovered adult coloring, and I colored for hours. In the past, I would have never had the patience to sit still for hours and color using pens and pencils and markers. I really have to thank my mom for being kind enough to go and get me a bunch of the most beautiful coloring pens and some of the most stunning art books ever. And I would just busy myself. Like one drawing would take me a day sometimes, and it would tire me out. So that, coupled with mind-numbing TV, would just be enough to really wear me out in the day. I am really grateful for my team. I have to thank Shreya, Hala, Abdullah, Fatima, Layla, Noor, Ammar, and everybody who was with us as well. I mean, you guys had my back. I'm so grateful. I always keep telling them that the reason I have my kid is because they gave me a time to rest and they gave me a break. I was never informed when we signed a new client or we lost one. I was always protected. Here's how I felt during my pregnancy, and I guess this is like a fear that women have after they have a miscarriage, and I guess this is quite normal. So like you live with this constant fear that something would go wrong because something has gone wrong before and it just hit you by surprise. You're always on the lookout for something to go wrong. Every time I'd go to the hospital and I would hear the heart, like the first time I heard the heartbeat of the baby, I started crying. I also knew in my gut and my heart I would have a boy. I kept saying, I know I'm going to have a boy. I felt like it was a do-over, my second chance, whatever you want to call it. I just felt like, God, take what I give you. And I just wanted a boy because I just felt like it doesn't matter. Like it didn't matter boy or girl, but I just felt like I'm okay having a boy. But my gut told me I was having a boy. I always felt like I know it's a boy inside of me. I would fuss over every little thing. I would spend at least an hour with the doctor just talking about every little thing and trying to see if there's any flags I've missed or anything that I should be concerned about. So I went from missing my urine test, if I, because you do those tests every month or every other month with the doctor. They just want to check on everything. And I used to go to my previous hospital and be like, I don't have time to do this now. Can I just do it next time? And they'd be like, sure. But with this doctor and with this experience, I was like the biggest fusser. I was like, I got a bit of gas, or like I would just fuss over every little thing. Like, what does this mean? And is this okay? And is this normal? My doctor was like the most reassuring person ever. I would talk to my baby a lot as well. I'd ask him to stay with me and stick with me and hang in there. I ate a lot whenever I could. I would eat whatever I could. I put on a lot of weight, but everything went out the window. I think in the first pregnancy, I lost weight actually in my first pregnancy. But what I was trying to do was just fill myself up out of fear that I might throw something out or throw up. I just wanted to eat and eat and eat and do what I wanted. And at this stage, I think everybody said, do what feels right for you anyways. Nothing else mattered except this baby. For the first time ever, there was a bigger priority in my life over my company, my career, my family. I was so focused on making sure this baby was going to come out healthy and normal. That meant disconnecting from everything. No more FOMO over working out, no more FOMO over not traveling, no more FOMO of seeing friends. And I honestly did also want to be alone. I remember I stopped talking to a lot of people because I just didn't want noise. People's lives and noise got to me. It took energy for me to listen, to connect, so I just wanted to be alone. One of the hardest things, and it's tough to admit on here, but it's true, and I don't think I ever shared this with anybody, but it was really hard for me to go to any of my friends' kids' birthday parties. I would always feel reminded of what I could have had and what I lost, so I tended to avoid those things, and I think my friends understood why. And it's not that I wasn't happy for them at all. I really was, and I wish everyone the very best, but I think it was more of something I had to manage and deal with myself, which is this emotion of losing something and just wishing you could change the story for yourself. On December 4th, I had an emergency cesarean. The doctor felt the heartbeat of the baby slow down, but by then I was getting really close to my due date. I was in a really good space. Even if I had given birth at that time, the baby would have been fully developed. I was checked in the hospital at night. My final meal was sage and sirloin. I had some spaghetti and cheesecake, except I found out I couldn't have the cheesecake, so that made me annoyed. The surgery was really scary, but I really was so up for it. I felt brave. So hearing my baby's first cry has been the most, and still today, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. I guess, again, we have this major fear of like losing the baby in an unexpected way. So hearing baby cry, like I was not able to move anything except my head, but I couldn't believe the sound I heard. My son is now 10 months. I really, really wanted to share this story, and I wanted to do it when I was ready. I still don't think I am ready, but I wanted to do it on a platform without interruption. I didn't want to do it in an interview. And for anyone who, I have a newfound respect for moms after this, and I'm not happy to admit this. I've built a whole brand based around supporting women, but I really, as an employer, I had no empathy for moms, though I really wanted to be one. I think what's crazy is we see moms, or we see pregnant women like struggle, but like we don't really see it because what they feel internally is something we can't see. So that, pregnancy is crazy. Like I didn't understand how much of an emotional toll it takes on you. Emotions are up and down. You're sad, you're happy, you're scared. There's so many contradicting emotions all the time. You get so much noise and advice from different people. It can really cause anxiety and stress. I think there was a time where I stopped seeing all family members as well for months because they'd be like, you should sit like this and you should drink water and you shouldn't do this. And it just, I didn't want to hear it. I just wanted to be alone. I was really wrong about moms because I thought that, not that they were gadi dele'oon, but I was like, I had no empathy. And I guess I only saw it the other way when I got pregnant myself, that this is hard. And I have this newfound respect for moms whose bodies change and deal with so much emotional stress, plus postpartum. It's just crazy. So women are brave, they're heroes, their bodies are capable of so much. I always look at my son and I say, I baked you inside of me like a piece of bread. I made your pupils and your eyes and your hair and your fingers all inside of my stomach. It's just wild to think what we're capable of. For the brave women who shared their miscarriage stories, whether it's online or personally through me, I do want to thank you. I think you reliving your story helps other women, and this is really why I shared such a private and vulnerable story. We feel less alone because of women like you, so I thank you for sharing the story. For those expecting mothers, I'm not trying to create fear. I'm not trying to put anybody off. This was my journey. A lot of people who've heard my story say, wow, that's such an exceptional, strange story that you've had. But I think it's designed in a way to say that, hey, I made it. I have a boy. I have a beautiful boy, and I can't wait to get pregnant again as well. I'm not put off by the experience. It's totally worth it to do this again. I'm just really lucky that I understood what I had. And it took 3 years and three different doctors, and one of them to be able to understand what I had and to really, really pay so much attention to me and give me the time that I need to communicate and to feel reassured. No more 10-minute appointments, and I think for anybody who's trying again, shop around for your doctor and find and get multiple opinions and find a doctor that has capacity for you. There's a lot that motherhood has taught me that I want to leave for another episode. And perhaps if you want me to create another episode about what I learned about transitioning into mommyhood, let me know in the comments on social media or DM me. I thank you for listening to my story. And I hope even if you don't have a baby or you don't have a miscarriage story or you don't know anybody who does, I hope that in the highest points or the highest learning and healing points from this story, I demonstrated some sort of resilience and a choice on how to deal with things and how to harness my emotions to protect myself and those around me as well. So I hope that, if anything, that would be a key takeaway as well. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening to an episode of the Woman Power Podcast. And thank you for downloading and streaming our podcast every week. If you love what you've heard, tag us on Instagram and follow the Woman Power Podcast and Woman Power Summit account for more information on our next episode. Please leave a rating review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps other women discover the show. That's it from me. See you next week.